Hi there once again, and welcome to another Expresso Mechanic Python tutorial, and in this one we're going to be looking at making this, which is a news ticker effector. A while ago someone got in touch with me and asked if it would be possible to make something like this using Expresso. They'd seen my tutorials on using the string nodes. Well, I took a look at it and I realised that actually Expresso wasn't really the best way to go, and that it would be much easier to use Python and do it like this using some motext. And that's where we're going with this tutorial. So without further ado, let's see if we can make this happen. The first thing to do is bring in some text, and of course in previous versions, I'm using S24 now, and in previous versions the motext used to be under the MoGraph objects, but now it's been moved to the primitives, so it's here now. So bear that in mind if you've never used motext and you're using S24. A little bit disconcerting at first, but anyway, that's where it is, and that sorts that one out. That gets us our text. Now the next thing we need to do is just have a quick look in the object tab here. There's really nothing we need to change. This is just to show you that it's set up exactly as it needs to be, so nothing to do in there, unless of course you want to. You can change the size of the text or do whatever you like, but for me it's fine. I'm going to leave it as it is. In our letters tab, this is where the effector needs to be, so we'll bring a Python effector in and grab one of those from here. Straight away you can see that it's doing its job, so it's in the right place and it's actually working. I'm just going to open the editor. I'm just going to switch to full control first and then open the Python editor, and for now all I'm going to do is remove the loop. Hit execute and we'll leave that at that. The reason I'm doing this is because I need to add some user data to the Python effector, and that's going to be the next step. I've got 6 pieces of user data to add, and you will sort of see what they're doing as time progresses. Most of it is going to be pretty self-explanatory actually. The first one I need to add will be a font, and this will be, surprisingly enough, a font data type. We'll use it, I'll leave the default at UI font. It could be any of the fonts I choose, but I'm just going to use UI. That's fine for the initial font there. Add another data, and this one will be words. This will be a string, and again that's set up. It doesn't need to have anything else done to it, so add some more data. And this one's a bit of a mouthful. This is going to be rotation direction left stroke right. This is just a bool or a boolean, so a checkbox that we can check on and off. It's going to control, as you would imagine, the direction that the text is going to move in. So if it's unchecked, it's going to be moving left. If it's checked, it's going to be moving right. It's as simple as that. Add another data, and this is going to be a speed controller. This is going to be a float data type. We'll use a float slider for the interface, a real value for the unit. We'll do it in steps of 1, that's fine, and we'll start with a value of 1 in the minimum and in the maximum 30, and we'll have a default value of 5. Add another data, another boolean. This is going to be using or use letter spacing. So we want a boolean, and again we can leave it as a default unchecked. And finally we can call this one letter spacing. Again it will be a float value, a float slider for the interface, a real value, and we'll say a limit of, well, the limit minimum we'll say 120 and a maximum of 400, and we can have a default value of say 200. That would be fine, I think, for that. Next thing to do is add a group, and what I'll do is just remove the group from the user data there. I'm going to just grab a hold of all of my, I want to grab a hold of all of my, that's it, all of my user data there, and drag them into the group, and then rename the group controls. And it helps if you can spell. That's fine. And then we can see that we've got a controls tab as opposed to a user data tab over here. If we click on there, everything is set up and the controls are in there too. So that all looks really nice. Okay, that's great. So moving on from here, we can start doing some coding. I'll just switch to a coding layout and we can take things from here. Just make this window a little bit smaller down at the bottom there. Okay, great. The first thing I'm going to do up here is say from collections import deque, and it's not deque, it's actually double-ended queue. That's what that is. We're going to import a double-ended queue from our collections. Something we've never done before, and the reason I'm using a double-ended queue is because it's a little bit like a list, a double-ended queue, but it's more powerful. It has some functionality that we need to use here in order to make this work. It's actually the key part of it, really. You'll see that a little bit later on. Anyway, moving on from here, we don't really need to change anything here. Again, has field, I'm not going to be using it, and I'm not going to be using the fall off either, but we'll leave them in there. So we've got those two, our count value and of course our matrix array, we need those, so they're set up for us, and that's fine, so we can move on from here. The first thing I'm going to do is start bringing in some user data, the first of which is going to be my speed. So I'm going to bring that in first and say speed is equal to op user data 5. Moving on from here, I'm going to bring in my direction control, and not surprisingly I'm going to call this direction. And then finally, for now, I'm going to bring in my spacing, and that will be my letter spacing here, not the use letter spacing, so we'll bring that one in. So that's the first little bit of it done. The next port of call for us is to create a frame variable. So we can say frame is equal to doc get time get frame doc dot get fps open double close. Moving on from here, I can define a couple of global variables, the first of which will be global x_positions, and then we'll define global characters. That gets those done, and we can now move on to defining a couple of functions. But before we go there, the first thing I'm going to do is say if frame is equal to 0, x positions is equal to an empty list, and characters is equal to double-ended queue open close brackets. And that's how you set up a double-ended queue. It's similar to a list, but you use curved brackets as opposed to square brackets, as you do with a function, which segues nicely into the next step for the tutorial. So we can say def setup, and we're going to set up our text here, and what we're interested in doing actually is seeing whether or not we have our letter spacing box here checked, and if we do, we're going to apply the letter spacing in here. If not, we'll just leave it as it's set up here. That's what we're doing with this particular function. So we'll say for I in range, CNT for count, and we can say characters dot append I. So at first we're simply getting the index values of our characters into our double-ended queue. That's what we're about here. We can then say if, and bring in our letter spacing bool here, if op user data 6 is equal to true, so if the box is checked, we can then say x underscore positions dot append, and it will be bracket spacing, and it will be multiplied by the index value multiplied by I. Else, if the checkbox is unchecked, x positions dot append, and it will be mar brackets I dot off dot x. So if the checkbox for our letter spacing is unchecked, we're going to ignore the letter spacing that we define ourselves, and we'll leave our letters at their default spacing. And that completes our first function. We can now move on to defining our second and final function for this expression, and that will be rotation. So define rotation. In fact, I'll call it rotate. And what we're going to do here is say for I in range, again, count. And we're going to do something interesting here. We're going to say character is equal to list characters dot index brackets I. So what we're doing is sequencing through our double-ended queue. Just need to give that an A in there, otherwise it won't be spelled correctly. So we're getting the individual index values from our double-ended queue, and we're giving them to a local variable called character. Now moving on from here, we can define the real values which we'll use to create a vector. So we're going to say x is equal to x positions square brackets I. So we're going to get the position x here of each individual letter. So we're sequencing through them and then looking at them individually to see what their x positions are. Y I'm going to make 55, so that's a variable that I'm going to define, or a constant that I'm going to define of my own, and the same with Z, it's just going to be equal to 0. I can then say mar character dot off is equal to C4D dot vector brackets x comma y comma z. And this is going to allow us to move our texts along its x-axis one letter at a time, and it will either be forward or backward, and you'll see how to do that next. In order to get this to work, we need to come down into our if statement here, and the first thing we need to say is setup open close to call the setup function at frame 0. Following on from here, we can say else rotate to call the rotate function, And then we can say if frame modulo, so a percentage sign for modulo, speed is equal to 0. And currently we have a speed value of 5, and that's in frames. So every 5th frame, we want to take a look at what we're doing with the rotation of our text. So we can say if direction is equal to true. So if this checkbox is checked, we can then say characters dot, and it's need to put an A in there, characters dot rotate, and we'll say -1. Now rotate is a function of the double-ended Q here, so characters of course is our double-ended Q. So this functionality is the special functionality that I mentioned earlier. This is very, very powerful, and it allows us to literally take a letter from the beginning of our double-ended Q and put it on the end of our double-ended Q, or vice versa, and that's how we're going to make the text rotate. So this will make our text rotate to the right, and then we can say else characters dot rotate 1. And that should give us what we need to make this work. So let's just see if it does. Let's just clear this window out and see if we've made any mistakes. I probably have. Let's have a look. So, okay, yes, in line 37, yeah, I sort of done. I've missed the A out of the word characters. That's fine. Okay, let's just clear this again and see if we've got any more syntax errors. And we don't. And now you can see that our text is rotating to the left because the checkbox isn't checked. If we check it, we should find it goes to the right. And it does. It rotates to the right. So that's great. That's working fine. Nothing wrong with that. The only thing that we can't do at the moment, though, we can't change our font. So if I check another font, it doesn't work because it's not set up yet. And we can't type any words into here and change what our text actually says. So that's the next step. We're going to set that up, and to do it, we're going to use a tiny little bit of Expresso. I'll grab a null and rename it Expresso. And then from my tags, I can come down to Programming Tags, Expresso. And I only need to drag in the Python effector and the text. In my Python effector here, or in the Python node, I can say controls font, and then again controls words. And in my text, object properties, font, object properties, text spline. Open these up to a good size, and then I can wire them up. Straight away the font changes. You can see that's already working. And if I plug in my text, it disappears. And that's exactly what should happen, because of course in my Python effectors controls, I have no words in the field. So let's just type something in, say Expresso mechanic. Will I spell that correctly? Not quite. Expresso, that's better, mechanic. I really must get some typing lessons. Oh, I really must. Okay, so that says Expresso mechanic. At least I hope it does. So let's just go into our full view so that we can see what we can see. That's good. So yeah, we can see all of our text. That's pretty good. I think we're okay there. And the font I'm not too sure about. I don't like Trender very much. Let's go and have a look, see what we can find. I think American Typewriter is what I used in the original, so I'll use that here. Yes, that's fine. And I'll put a couple of addition signs between each of the words. And that gives us that. That's quite nice. That makes it look a bit like a news ticker, really. So if we run this, let's just go back to the beginning. Yeah, that works okay. But you can see that the letters are not evenly spaced. And that's why I've got to use the letter spacing here, the use letter spacing. If we click on that and return to the beginning, it doesn't do anything at frame 0, but if we go one frame in, you can see that it does evenly space the letters. and makes it look even more like a news ticker. So that's why I've got that in there. If we just run that, you can see that it's moving from left to right. If we uncheck the box, go back to the beginning, we're now moving from right to left as we probably expected to go. I'll also add a few more frames. Let's go to 300. Just play that through. Yeah, so that's all working very nicely. Now, the speed control, at the moment we're doing it, well, we're rotating every 5th frame, but if we up that to 30, we'll now only rotate once a second, so it will be much slower. Yeah, that's working okay. If anything though, it's a little bit too slow. Let's take it down to about 10. Go back to the beginning and see what we're getting now. Yeah, that's working okay. Yeah, that's looking good, not too bad at all. And that just about completes the tutorial really, because there's nothing else that needs to be done. So as always, I hope you've enjoyed doing this one and that you've got something out of it. I certainly think it's been worth showing you the double-ended cue because, as you've seen, it's really quite powerful. And there should be a number of other uses that you can find for this, so hopefully you'll come up with some of those in your own projects. But anyway, that's how you go about creating a news ticker effector, and it wraps things up here. So if you've enjoyed the video, then please give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. And wherever you happen to be on social media, be it Instagram or anywhere else, please share the tutorial, because all this good stuff helps to keep the channel going in the right direction. But that completes this one, and I'll see you very soon on the next tutorial.